All right. So John asked me to come talk about the Good Lives model, and part of me is like, okay, this is sort of a very theoretical or technical thing, but it's not. So I'm going to give you the basics and the theory and all of that, but maybe we should try to figure out how to make it applicable, right? And for you guys. So it is. This is being recorded. Like I'm being recorded. How careful do I have to be about treatment? For a very long time, traditional sex offending treatment was a very harsh and judgmental and punitive and rather ugly thing that for many people actually caused more harm than perhaps it did good. That is changing. It can change. ATSA has treatment protocols, and we should all be working on the risk-needs-responsivity model, and not just saying no, but saying yes, right? So what we're talking about with the Good Lives model is a strengths-based. It's not just you're risky, let's mediate the risk. It's also sort of going, what do you need to be a healthy, whole, authentic, solid, pretty happy, actualized human being? And so that's why we like it. We don't, in my program, I think we don't really formally put it in there like workbooks and things, but I think just myself and the folks that work for me we just want people to find their authenticity, and that inherently is kind of a Good Lives model thing. So we're going to run into that. So what it is it's a theoretical approach to working with all types of offending behavior. Obviously, in this room, we're dealing with a lot of sexual offending, but Good Lives was actually created for any type of offending behavior. So it's not something that's sex crime specific, strength-based, positive, motivational, things we love, and not a standalone program. So if you are someone who has to go to treatment, you're not just going to get Good Lives stuff, right? It's something that we integrate into that as part of the Risk-Needs-Responsivity model. I walk when I talk. I hope that's not distracting for you guys. So when we take that and we look specifically at people who have committed sexual offenses, the basic foundations of the Good Lives model is that people commit sexual offenses because they lack the opportunity or the ability to get important things in life, right? Just things we all want, things we all need. And something gets in the way of that, right? And we end up trying to get those needs in a way that is offending and harms another person. So sexual offending occurs when various personal, physiological, or social conditions will lead the person to achieve their goals through the offending behavior. So if you think about that, and we'll talk about what are those goals. If one of those goals is, right, like intimacy and relationship and connection, we all want that, right? We're humans. Everyone wants it at a varying degree. The Good Lives model would kind of say, okay, well, there's nothing wrong with that desire, right? There's nothing wrong with that goal. Something got in the way of that goal. And for, say, someone who offended a child, right? So something got in the way of that goal, and it ended up going over here in this direction. Not that the goal is bad. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So for us as treatment providers, the goal when we're looking at Good Lives is to understand what is important to you as an individual, right? A Good Lives model is not a blanket thing. What's important to you is going to be different from what's important to the person who sits next to you in group, right? And so my job as a treatment provider is to get to know you, figure out, so you're in the front, sorry. Figure out what's important to you, what you value, where you want to go, how do we get there, and what are the blocks, right? So it is a very individualized thing, looking at each person, and then my job is actually to help you get there, right? The best I can. Become an authentic human being, or live in our authenticity. All right, so Good Lives kind of sounds like a weird thing, but it talks about primary human goods, right? Everyone seeks to achieve these primary human goods, and we can just kind of, they renamed it to common life goals. And let's just bump up to what are they? So this is what the Good Lives models, how they categorize things that all of us as humans wish to achieve at some level, right? And so these are our common life goals. life. We'll talk about what that means, right? And so a lot of that, and I always talk to my folks about living versus surviving, right? Anybody been through the system, they can survive, right? They got those skills down. The living can be a little difficult, right? So life is not just, obviously some of it is, do I have safe housing? Do I have enough food? But it's also thriving versus just surviving, right? We're going to go through these in depth. Knowledge, excellence in work and play, excellence in agency. These are all things we love, right? We want friendship, community, spirituality, happiness, and creativity. This is total anecdotal. So I've found anecdotally, no science, no data, just my practice, that a lot of my clients who are very creative folks get hemmed up into doing things that they shouldn't be doing when they have let go of their creativity, when they have stopped doing that. And I don't care if that's playing the guitar or cooking, but when they stop expressing that piece of themselves, things can go a little wonky. So that's one of them. All right. Secondary. So those are the common life goals, right? Those are the sort of categories of things that we all want. The secondary goods are how we go about obtaining them, right? What do I do to get those common life goals? What are my ways that I attempt to do that? And obviously, again, when we're talking about using this with people who have committed some kind of crime, we're trying to help folks get these secondary goods to achieve those goals in a lawful, consensual manner that does no harm. All right. So again, what's my job? Help figure out what's important to you, right? For some people, a sense of spirituality is going to be massively important. For somebody else, maybe they're like, that's at the bottom of the list, but knowledge, right, is something that they wish to seek. My job is to figure that out, to reinforce the importance of those goals, right? When the woman was talking about, being able to connect with people who also have felonies, right? That's community. And really my job would not be to squash that, but to say, okay, I get the need for a sense of community. How can we do that within the constructs of what we can work with, right? Help you overcome those barriers. Also help understand the relationship of those goals and how they did relate to the offending behavior, because we have to do that. And build capacity, right? Skill building. So it's not just sort of, how do I help you get a job, which I warned that nice lady, she's probably going to get about 50 phone calls from my office on Monday morning. Everybody's going to be calling. So wonderful human beings like her will help in that capacity. My job as a therapist is to help your internal capacity, right? Your emotion regulation, to help you deal with the trauma or give you those skills from a mental health perspective that you can use. All right. So what is the good life plan? It's your roadmap to fulfilling a well-balanced life. Whether we know it or not, we all have a good life plan, right? Anybody when they were young have a thought as to what they wanted to be or do when they grew up? That's a good life plan, right? Whether that's I want to, grow up and get this degree, or I want to get married and have children, or I want to, save the world. That's our good life plan. So we all have one. We just don't necessarily put that language on it. Where does a good life go awry, right? Because it can go awry. And this is, again, their language, right? So we can have problems in our means to obtain goals, right? So if I have a common life goal of life, right, being able to feed my family, but I don't have the means to do that, right, in an appropriate way, I don't have a job, I don't have resources, I don't have access to social services, and I steal food to feed my family, I'm engaging in offending behavior. So it's the means, right? It's not an inappropriate goal to want to care for your family. The means goes awry, right? So again, we're talking about the means. We're using inappropriate or harmful means to get those goods. Lack of scope. So we might have a plan. Maybe it's just not a very good plan, right? Maybe it's too narrow, maybe it's too wide, maybe we can't kind of find, some things are left out. So it's just kind of a plan that lacks scope. We could have conflicts between two primary goals. So if I really want something in knowledge and I really want something in spirituality and they conflict, maybe things can go awry there. And a lot of, I think, where we go in terms of teaching from a therapeutic perspective is when we could lack the internal or external capacities for that, right? So if I really have a plan and a goal, but I don't have, you know, emotion regulation skills, or I struggle with interpersonal or social skills, that's where we come in, right? Coping mechanisms to try to help that. So flaws, things can go awry. Offending behavior happens when we have these conflicts in our good lives plan. All right. So again, it's approach goals. John wrote in the little write-up that I'm talking about how it relates to risk, so I'm talking about how it relates to risk. I kind of do this one thing at a time, so I had to look at what I was supposed to be talking about when I made this. The Good Lives Plan also is a risk management plan, right? It's just looking at it in a different direction. So if you have, you know, a treatment provider or a treatment culture where they're like, you know, this is risk, right? We're mitigating risk. This is also doing that, right? But in an approach fashion versus avoidance. So for my guys that say pornography addiction or compulsive pornography issues, if they're attracted to women, can they go their entire life and never see an attractive woman? Is that humanly possible? No, like unless they leave their house, never leave their house, and they never use social media, and they never put their television on, they're gonna see it. So that's an avoidance, right? Like we're just getting that, ooh, can't do it. Versus approach goals, or let's learn how to deal with things. So it still is risk management. This is a quote actually from the creators of the program, that promoting goods without managing risk will potentially result in clients who are very happy and very well adjusted, but who also could remain dangerous or at risk to reoffend. So we want to always be talking about, because that's our purview, right? In treating folks who have committed a sex crime, is to, you know, to manage risk, but it's more about, I'm going to manage that risk by helping you create the life that keeps you happy and healthy. I know, it's like, I'm not used to preaching to the choir. I'm used to like preaching to the, I don't know, the enemy.
People who don't like your model?
I teach a lot of law enforcement and probation and parole. So I feel like I'm used to justifying things a lot, and I'll have to do that with you. It feels really nice. Thank you. So what does it look like in practice? And this first one, actually, no matter what kind of treatment you're doing, like we're supposed to be doing that. Here in Pennsylvania, SOAB says you are supposed to have a comprehensive assessment if you are if you're mandated to go to treatment. Assessment, it does use cognitive behavioral therapy. We're going to focus on motivation, skills building, and all of these risk factors. So this is actually, what is this? This is dynamic risk. If we look at static risk, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about dynamic risk, things that change. Anybody who's ever seen a stable or an acute 2007, these are things we can work on. I have duly talked about risk, right? Check. Okay, done. So when they change things from like they change things over to common life goals, they expanded upon it. And like I said, I really love the life one, that we're not just surviving, right? The goal is to figure out how to live and to thrive, right? Knowledge, learning and knowing, we're going to go through these. They change it to being good at work and play, excellence and agency, personal choice and independence, inner peace to peace of mind, community to community, being part of a group. And while we've heard all about that today, and this has been a wonderful day of being with a group, happiness and creativity. So let's roll through these. By definition, life or living and surviving is healthy living and functioning, as well as meeting basic needs. The means, how do we do that, right? So, and we can talk about this, I think, both in how, because I am with the choir and I'm not with the enemy. I shouldn't say enemy, that's wrong. I actually really like a lot of the probation officers I work with. I like them very much. How, again, having conflicts in these goals can lead to any kind of offending behavior. And I think there's also a piece of this that's a struggle, right? Like once you're on supervision of some sort, we also then lack the means, right? So how do I get my basic needs? The bottom of Maslow's hierarchy needs, right? Food, shelter, and water. I need money in our culture, right? I need some means to do that, which means I need a job. We just had a very long discussion about how hard that is and the resources that are necessary. So not have, if there's an impediment to that being on the registry and the consequences of these actions have to just sometimes those basic needs. We need healthy nutrition, we need physical activity, we need healthcare, something else that is outrageously expensive at present if you don't have access to those sorts of means, and safe housing, right? And so if we have conflicts here that could lead to offending, for me, the people that I've worked with, conflicts here aren't things that normally lead to offending. Again, just my clients. This is where I'm seeing conflicts based on post-incarceration or probation and parole, right? And again, these are the things that are increasing dynamic risk. I can't get a job, I don't have a place to live. I struggle to meet those things. And these are the things that decrease dynamic risk, right? Got a job, I'm feeling good about myself, I can pay my rent, I can support my family, I can afford to go to the doctor once in a blue moon, things like that. Surviving is also, or living is also, for me, and this is not theirs, it's kind of taking the time to figure out who I am, which is really what the whole Good Lives model is about, and figuring out what living actually means, right? And so many folks in the system are trauma survivors, right? There's also, they've caused some harm. There's trauma while incarcerated. There's trauma while they're out. So there's so much of that, again, the surviving is good. And most folks have never taken a minute to just be like, what do I really want, right? Who am I? What are the things I want out of life? Can I get there? How can I get there? And we'll talk about, at the end, I do this little exercise with folks. And I think I sent John the PDF, called the values card sort. And it literally feels like a kindergarten exercise, which is very deep, which we'll talk about, to kind of help you figure out, like, what are the things that are really meaningful to you? A lot of people, if you ask them that, they can maybe come up with one or two, but they just don't know, right? We don't know ourselves enough. So for me, that's moving towards the living. Learning and knowing, right? A desire for information, desire to understand ourselves, or a desire to understand the world. How do we do that? School, self-development, treatment, 12-step, reading, journaling, all of those things. Sometimes for my folks, the internet, what does the internet do for the desire for information? Who's gone down the wiki rabbit hole? And for some of my folks that end up looking at CSAM and convicted of CSAM offenses, the hole, like the internet rabbit hole, gets you, and you can get down that. So sometimes that desire for information can go askew or can lead us to things like internet addiction or things like that. Struggles again, once you're out. Anybody trying to go back to school? Easy?
I don't know, it's just a thing, just do it, for me. But I just approach things. It's just a necessity and I just have to push through.
We had a lot of young people, the Philly office, Temple, a lot of young people go to Temple. And they don't let them back in. They don't, like they're a semester away, they don't let them back in, or they kick them out to finish it. So that can be very hard. If you're applying to college, right, after you have a crime, particularly a sex crime on your record, very difficult to do. Yeah, if you feel like sharing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in school and I had to, I did community college and then I had to apply for an emergency meeting because you can't go on as a person with a sex crime. So I had to meet with a psychologist, the police, the professor, the whole board, and they deemed me safe to attend. And then added to university status with, not quoting, but a 4.0 and honors and all that, and had to go through the same process again. It's very humiliating, it's humiliating. And about a month in, one of my classmates Googled me, and it's been humiliating ever since. But so you get it done. I'm not gonna let it stop me, but it's not easy.
It's not easy, yeah. And again, depending on what education or knowledge you're going for, but there are definitely impediments. There are 0 impediments, right, to self-help books, study, 12-step, right? It's free, go to the library, do all of those things. So part of humanity, part of ourselves, right, is this desire for knowledge, whether it's to know thyself or know something else, right? And so again, as part of this good lives model, as I get to know you, is that important to you? What is that? Is that I want to get to know myself, or is that I have this career goal like she was talking about? How can I help you get that, to help you have good means, right, to achieve that healthy life goal? Being good at work and play. I think we all kind of like to be good at something, right? That feels nice. So again, that's one of these life goals, and that can be sports, hobbies, work stuff. You know, and again, these aren't necessarily things in my experience when we have impediments ahead of time that I see move people towards offending behavior, right? These things tend to be where folks struggle after the fact. Again, you want to play on the sports team, you want to do those types of things on probation or supervision, that can be very difficult to do. You know, we're doing safety plans for folks to try to go be part of a baseball league or a basketball league, or, you know, we had to, major university had to write the letter, yes, this person is safe to be able to go to a football game, right? Stuff like that. So there's impediments to that afterwards. And again, I think John's intention was for me to talk about how this actually, you know, decreases risk, but a lot of the restrictions, again, at the choir are increasing risk. So like I said, I always advocate, if you are on supervision, ask, right? You have something you want to do, we figure it out. All right, what else? Personal choice and independence, right? So the definition of that common life goal, the autonomy of choice and independence, and the desire to formulate our own goals. So impediments in this, even before any kind of inappropriate behavior happens, for me, again, this is just my thoughts, that sometimes this gets us into spaces where offending behavior can happen. For individuals who engage in things like exhibitionism or voyeurism, a lot of that is sometimes driven by what we call eroticized rage, anger that gets sexualized. And a lot of times it's folks who just don't have a voice, right? Feel oppressed in their relationships, they struggle. And so they're lacking, right? That autonomy of choice and independence. And then sometimes, again, for certain individuals, that can influence them to engage in those types of behaviors, right? We don't like somebody telling us what to do 24/7, right? Some of us push back against that a lot, right? So it's a hard thing to live with. So how can we try to get that autonomy and that independence, or to formulate our own goals? So sometimes, like I said, with those types of cases, we see struggles or disconnects there that maybe are part of what underlies some of those behavioral choices. Peace of mind. Definition: emotion regulation or equilibrium. Emotional regulation means what?
Kind of managing when things don't go right, so that you don't overreact or sometimes underreact. Right? Just being able to, not always an even keel, but just manage.
Right. Like we don't always have to be like,
Yeah, exactly.
it's when we go, okay, take a breath, bring it in, bring
No,
it in,
no
bring it
totally
in.
freaking out, no totally sinking into oblivion, yeah.
Yeah, so the ability to kind of manage and cope, have those feelings, let them ride, figure out how to handle them without doing something inappropriate elsewhere.
Operating from an adult aspect.
Adult.
Yes, operating from that wise mind, right? From that adult piece, right? And look, there's a bazillion people in the world who have emotion regulation struggles, right? That's a lot. The world's gotten very angry lately. You know, so some of that, you know, and it's not just sexual behaviors where that comes out, right? Why do you think a whole lot of people drink? Right?
Self-medicate.
Self-medicating, right? And so for many folks, PTSD, trauma, like those feelings are too much, can't handle it.
It's a coping mechanism.
It is a coping mechanism. And the struggle with substances, right, is that it's a great coping mechanism for that little tiny period of time.
Right.
It makes you forget.
You're trying to weren't given those coping mechanisms on how to deal with it.
Nobody taught us, yeah. And so in the realm of sort of sexual behaviors, right, where we see people using sex or sexuality to cope, right? Masturbation, pornography, a lot of those things can go that way because, you know, click, 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 click on the internet gives you that same dopamine rush that drugs do or things like that. So a lot of people use sex as a coping mechanism as opposed to something healthier. And so for me, many of the folks that I work with really, really have the capacity deficits when it comes to emotion regulation. Impulsivity goes in here, right? Yeah,
Not good.
it's a struggle. The impulsivity is really hard. I send some unlikely folks to yoga.
So what you're describing really is an adolescent mentality. And what I've seen, and again, I have to factor in the fact that I'm getting older, is
The gray hair too.
the gray hairs, thank you, is it seems generational, but it seems like younger generations aren't getting out of adolescence socially, emotionally. They're getting out of it cognitively because we're educating far better than ever before, but they're not getting past some of the milestones of
This-
these
yeah.
other aspects of our maturity, so that they're still acting impulsively at 30 years old. Whereas, you know, my father made sure I wasn't doing that by the time I was 18, gosh darn it.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm beginning this, my belief that we still incarcerate people is the younger ones are just, they don't know how to act like adults yet.
There's a million things that go into that. For folks who have trauma, the ACEs, I know our lovely AG guy didn't get into that. Emotional development usually stunts at the age of your trauma, right? So if I'm 42, I'm quite much older than that, and I had a significant trauma of some sort when I was 12, how does my 42-year-old brain work? Like a 12-year-old, right? And we have to learn how to do those things and I always say we kind of grow people up, right? We help them learn those things that they didn't get when they were a child because they had that trauma that perhaps stunted some of their growth.
I think it's also important to note with the emotional dysregulation is some of the smartest people in the world have emotional regulation problems. It's a factor of life. It's a factor of the shortened attention spans as we continue on with phones. It's a factor of so many mental health facilities, not facilities, diagnoses, that it may never become a problem until
That's
it
it.
becomes a problem.
Right.
And it may never,
It may never, yeah.
but it does still impact the day to day.
Yeah, and it's, I mean, and again, in this realm of dealing with, you know, when the sexual behaviors go right, that impulsivity is a struggle because the brakes aren't there, right? I often describe it to my guys, like when you have the impulsivity struggles, you are driving down the Autobahn in a Lamborghini, no brakes. Right? Great, that looks fun, let's go do it, right? And so again, what we try to do is just install some brakes, and I'm like a yoga, tai chi, go meditate, go do all that. But yeah, there's millions of people who are impulsive and don't end up engaging in certain behaviors, or their impulsive choices don't impact their life too much. Yeah, just because something exists doesn't make it a disorder, right? Absolutely, I'm very careful for that.
I think is that more directed at like, because I think I read a bunch of peer-reviewed stuff about like emotional regulation and BPD, personality disorders, and like the capacity there or no capacity for emotional regulation, like borderline and stuff like that.
That's a whole nother ball of wax.
Okay.
It is just my personal belief that a lot of people who are diagnosed with borderline personality disorder actually have complex trauma. But so I mean, I think, and again, like when we're dealing with all of these things, it's trauma, right? So we're trying to get trauma informed. We just are heading down a bunny trail. Hope y'all are okay with that. Right? So where does trauma start, right? This is where the whole intergenerational trauma comes from, right? Like everything that has happened to your ancestors impacts you because when you are in utero, right, you are being impacted by what the mother is experiencing, right? And so if the mother is experiencing stress, it is altering your brain development, it is altering the ultimate expression of your DNA, right? And so trauma starts here. And when you have that alteration of brain development, so that intergenerational trauma, then when you add perhaps environmental ACEs, literally the brain structures aren't developing in a neurotypical fashion for some people. I'm not talking like autism spectrum disorder, things like that, but like the brains are just a little different because of all of the stuff that's going on in utero and childhood. Now, the beauty is that we now know we have neuroplasticity. We can work on all of that, right? It's not a one and done, but it literally goes back intergenerational trauma wise. Sorry, trauma bunny trail, sorry guys. Right. So emotion regulation is really, really good, really big strategy, you know. So what we spend a lot of time on, and like I said, not necessarily even in this like formal good lives manner, is, you know, what coping mechanisms do I have that are great, work really well? What do I need to work on? How can we implement some other ones? You know, let's do some breath work. I have the luxury of having a good friend who's a yoga instructor by one of my offices. She does not care if someone has a sex crime. They are welcome in her yoga studio, or she'll come into the office every now and then and do stuff. Again, it's that access to resources that some folks don't have. So we really, for us, treatment provider wise, these deficits in emotion regulation, like that's really for us to help you too, right? And to teach, not to be like, why did you do that? But to teach, right? All right. Relationships and friendships, right? So the definition of this in the Good Lives model, desiring bonds with others. And again, it's kind of a pretty generalized human thing. Everybody has a spectrum. Some people are a little more introverted, some people not. And to have some type of relationship, intimate relationships, family, or romantic relationships. Not everybody wants a romantic relationship, right? There's aromantic people out there that don't want that, but most of us want some type of connection, right? How do we get that? A healthy way, again, social activities, clubs, groups, friends, you know, having healthy, intimate relationships, if that's something that you want. And again, when you take the good lives piece into, you know, working with sexually abusive behaviors, a lot of times we see deficits here, right? Folks that want to connect, right? They have a desire to be with others. They don't have the opportunity. They don't have the capacity. They're socially awkward. They're anxious, right? There's some struggles to try to get to those connections. And sometimes that means that seeking goes awry, right? And it goes into the wrong place or an inappropriate place. Asperger's. Yeah. So that's a whole nother one. Sorry, I spent a lot of time trying to keep people on the spectrum out of jail. Doesn't work very well, unfortunately. So this is also, so we can have conflicts here that can end up to move some folks into some offending behaviors. But again, this is one of those things we've already talked about. That's a conflict afterwards, right? When you're restricted. How do you find social connection when you can't go anywhere, right? And you can't do anything, right? So it is work to do. In my mind, groups should be that connection, right? So if you are you know, mandated to treatment, I call it my happy hippie bubble. I can only control the groups in my office. That group should actually be a place for connecting and for, you know, learning these skills, giving and receiving support. You know, so that in theory, if you're mandated to treatment, that should be a support place for you. But it is also, it's a struggle. Trying to think of what else I wanted to say about that. Community, a desire to be connected by definition. We want to volunteer, we want to participate in community activities, we want to be around people that share our values, right? And do things in the community. So for somebody where this is really important, maybe that's a person of service. That's like clearly everybody who showed up here today, I'm assuming. Community is pretty important to them, and service is probably pretty important to them. Otherwise, you wouldn't have taken your Friday to come out here and do this, right? And so how do we do that? And so again, if we have struggles with community or in the skills or the means to get to that community, according to sort of this model, that's when maybe we can end up in some of the sexual offending behavior realms, right? And so you brought up the Asperger's. We work with a lot of folks on the spectrum. Part of being on the spectrum for some people is some difficulty in social communication. Well, that's easier online, right? Much easier to communicate online. And so that for some of those folks ends up down a troubling path because it's easier there, they connect and they're, not necessarily thinking about, legalities or illegalities, they're thinking about friends. They're thinking about connections, they're thinking about people to talk to. And it doesn't work, and obviously can go awry. I'm trying to think of what else. What time, how long am I actually here till? 3:30, is that what it says? All right, spirituality. Our friend behind you is our man, right? So everybody's gonna be at your uncle's church now. Too. I think that's fantastic, right? So for many people, and spirituality doesn't just have to be religious, right? So for some people, that is a religious faith, a religious practice. For some folks, that's having a meaning or a purpose in life, right? That's your sense of spirituality, having something that you want to give to the world, or just being a sense of being a larger whole, right? And so anybody who's been to 12-step groups, right? A lot of folks might struggle if they say the word God, but it's just really about being connected to something bigger than yourself. And so most of us want that, but again, where it is and where it's value to you, is going to be different. So that can be our formal religious services. Your uncle's going to get busy probably. I'm sure he's okay with that. Meditation and prayer, like we can do that on our own. Studying spiritual materials. So we have all of these means to get to these things. How many folks, I'm just going to ask this, I think I was an anomaly, when they were young, kind of knew what their meaning or their purpose was in life? When did we figure that out? Have we figured that out?
I was in my 30s.
You mean 30? Yeah, like, most people don't. I mean, my mother will tell you that when I was 12, apparently I decided I was going to be a psychologist. And she got brought into the principal's office because I was very offended that I couldn't give Rorschach tests to my 6th grade classmates.
You making your own or being blind?
Well, no, I'm like,
If you're making your own.
I was making my own, right? I was like, what do you mean I have to be a licensed psychologist with a higher degree, right? But again,
Maybe you were in past life.
I was Freud. No, don't make me Freud. That's a whole nother horrible thing. So I had an idea what I wanted to do. But if you would have asked me even when I was in college, would I be here? I had no idea that this was like my purpose or my goal, right? I had no idea that I would rather spend the majority of my days with folks who committed sex crimes than the majority of the other people in the world. Didn't realize that was my purpose until my 30s is the magical number, perhaps, right? So we have to spend the time to learn about ourselves and to know that, to figure out what that is. And it's important to us. And I think for me, the struggle for so many of my guys is that you forget you're a human being when you're going through this process with dignity and all of those things. And you're allowed to kind of think about that. And I get the surviving is hard. It doesn't give us time, space, or energy to be thinking about a lot of these things, but we need to get there. Happiness. I don't like the word happiness. That's just me. I like the word content. So kind of big, generally content, because are we going to be happy all the time? No, because emotions do this. But general sense of satisfaction, pleasure, meaning, or purpose. Creativity. A desire for novelty or innovation. So that could be artistic or engaging in novel things. One of my therapists, she's an art therapist, doing her PhD and looking at creativity. And folks forced to register, and so we have a strange office, I guess, right? So you can come in and there might be painting, there might be crayons and coloring books, there might be Nahum playing the guitar, because we actually do believe that having a creative connection is really good for a lot of people, and that we really enjoy when folks' creativity is in the realm of baking and cooking, and you share. Because we do appreciate that. But creativity is important, right? And these are things that are really important to us. And so those are kind of the premises. And again, we've talked about how things go wrong. We have to reflect on. How does it relate to risk-based treatment, right? We're looking at personal histories, right? Sex history, polygraphs, all that stuff. We're looking at the offending progression, right? Like knowing the conflicts or the deficits and achieving your good lives plan. That's the offense progression, right? Did I have, was I impulsive? Was I not coping with my emotions well? Was I seeking connection, but I didn't know how to do it, or I didn't have access to connection? Cognition and problem solving, and relationship and intimacy deficits, right? These are a lot of the things we look at when we're sort of actuarially assessing risk. Again, sexual, we've talked about all this. So how do I figure out what's important to me? Like I said, I love that values card sort thing. I don't know if you guys have access to that. It's literally a bunch of sheets of paper with little statements on it, and you get your kindergarten skills out and you cut and you do, is it very important to me, or not important to me? And you just kind of go through, it's like 80 or 90 things, and like, okay, is this important? Is it not important? And it's astonishing to me how many people have never actually thought about a lot of those things. So we use that therapeutically very often to just help them figure out themselves. And we will often do it, what's important to you versus what was the programming you got in your family, right? Because a lot of us were raised in families where certain things were important, and we kind of integrate that until maybe one day we're like, do I actually believe that, right? So it's a very good little exercise to literally make you sit down and say, okay, whatever sentence is on there, is that important to me? Is it more important to me? Is it not important to me? And most of the folks I work with have never spent that much time thinking about themselves and their own values to really integrate that. So if he sent it to you, or you can email me, it's a fun little cut and paste. Reading, journaling. I know we're shrinks, we always say journal. But for a lot of people, it's very helpful, right? To put your thoughts on a page. To sort of think about things. There's a ton of journals out there that give you a prompt, or websites that give you a prompt to think about. And I don't know if anyone was in the circles group earlier. Our guy gave us a little question. He's like, well, what makes you feel joy, right? That's even something to think about, right? That's a journaling prompt. Obviously, technically, we're there to help you figure out you and how to help you be the best versions of you, right? So if you've got a good therapist, talk to us about it. We'll help you find your way, hopefully. Hopefully, we'll do our best to help you find your way. How's that? So technically, if you're kind of, going with the Good Lives models stuff, literally you can just kind of go through each of the areas and be like, okay, what do I want in this area, right? So maybe I've got the living and surviving down, I'm pretty good, but I want more education. I want to go get a certificate in some kind of IT thing that I do not understand. What do I want, right? How do just actually sitting down and saying, what are my goals, right? And goals change. What do I want in these areas? And then how will I get that, right? And that's the thinking process. And with the impulsivity, right? We go from, I want that to, I'm gonna take it, versus slowing the thought process down of what's important, what do I want, and how do I get there, right? So slowing things down. So there's just some little exercises that you can do if you haven't spent the time. Again, I'm not normally preaching to the choir. I'm normally preaching to people who have not spent much time in therapy or thinking about these things, to figure out what's important to me and how I get there, and integrating this into treatment for people who've committed sex crimes. For me, is like organic. It's really easy, right? Like that's our job. I know not everyone has that experience, but it's a very easy, good way to just like, is everyone's risk less if we're just authentic human beings doing the things that bring us joy and make us happy in a healthy way? So I've never sort of seen the struggle with that, but I was also sent to the principal's office at a very young age, so that's what it is. I think that's okay. Yeah, I think that's kind of it. Which is why, and again, I'm sort of sitting here going, well, if I teach this to treatment providers, we get into a lot more depth of how we do that. When I talk about it to probation and parole, we kind of just like, this exists, we can do this, it's okay. But for you guys, I'm like, I don't know how to integrate that. And John just kind of, I think he just wanted me to come and talk about this so people are aware, right? There's other ways to do things, right? Evidence-based practice means we take in all of the things, right, that are proven to be helpful and use them. And it's okay to be positive, right? It's okay to be supportive and happy. I did a webinar for them, I think in the spring, kind of talking about people's rights, right, as folks who are mandated into treatment, and you're allowed to try to grow. That's the point for me. You had a question.
Yeah, do you get pushback from the local probation and parole on not being tough enough or accountable enough?
They're not gonna screw with her.
So, what?
They're not gonna screw. You're essentially, you've had training in psychology, advanced psychology, and I'm thinking being a therapist, you're basically a mind cop. You're not gonna.
Can I use that? I think it's in the relationships we build, right? And I think we've heard a lot about that today. I have good relationships with a number of probation.
Okay.
And they know how I work. And they know that I'm not doing certain things. Probation officers will never be allowed in a group. That is actually unethical. There's no confidentiality. There's like, are you signing releases of information, right? So they know. And so if there's somebody on a probation that was like, I have to be able to go to group, they're just not gonna refer to me. They're not allowed in my office unless we have a set meeting. This is a therapeutic space.
But do you ever have conflict? I'm guessing that, you violate people less than probably some other treatment providers. And if you're not violating, do they ever look at you and go, you're not holding them accountable because you're not violating as many people?
So I had folks not necessarily question that so overtly. So if you fail a polygraph, I am not going to violate you. This is part of the therapeutic process, right? I don't, like, for me, whether you pass or fail is not important. I get all the meaty stuff in the interview, and that's the stuff that we work on. So I don't violate people for failing. I don't violate people for not paying or having a balance. You can't get a job. How am I gonna violate you and send you back to jail because you can't pay for treatment? Like, you got $5, give me $5, we'll figure it out when we get there. So yeah, I do not violate people as often, but I also have the ability with a lot of them to explain my position, right? And this is why we're doing it. Early on, I had one probation officer be like, well, the guy lied to you. Like, somebody lied, it happens. He's like, aren't you gonna kick him out of treatment? And I was like, I work with a lot of addicts. If I kicked out everybody who lied to me, I'd have no clients. Right? Like, it's just, people are not necessarily open and forthcoming with all of their deepest secrets when they just meet. So for me, again, and now we've heard this, it's about building relationships, right? And so I leave the heavy to probation. If they have things they want to do, this is treatment, that is probation. So, I've had some probation, I'll be like, Jen, like, you're different, right? And so again, some places won't refer to me because of how I do business, and I'm fine with that. Does that make sense? Yeah. Exactly. I'm gonna go there first.
Quick question, you said earlier that it's unethical for the parole officer to be in a group. Does that mean it's not supposed to happen, or is it against the law, or it depends on the
Right, now I'm gonna get in a whole lot of trouble.
Because I know several groups who the.
Oh, it's a
officer-
very common practice.
Yes.
And so, there's a quote in that webinar I did for the PARSOL folks. I'm just pointing at you because I think you're part of putting that together. Because I did that webinar like 3 days after a mandatory SOAB meeting, where the head, Mary, some of you have talked to her, of the SOAB said, SOAB your licensure trumps SOAB regulations. My licensure states that I need to protect client confidentiality, and I cannot disclose my client's information to anyone, harm to self, harm to others, child abuse, without a signed release of information. Have you signed a release of information for that probation officer who's not yours in the group?
They do that in Georgia.
They do it here.
Oh, they make you sign a release?
I had to sign whatever HIPAA release, whatever,
Mhm.
to say that the treatment provider could send the documents to probation.
Okay, so that's different,
Oh, that's
right?
different.
So I send monthly reports, but that's you sending your information to your probation officer. This is your probation officer group and his probation officer group, who is not your probation officer, who's then learning all of this technically protected information about other people where we do not have a release of information. There becomes a question, an ethical question of who is the client? Are you the client or is probation the client? You're the client. My license, I'm not losing my license for any probation officer, which is again why in my program, I own it, I can make rules. Probation is not allowed to do.
But each licensure is different though, each place is different, right?
Now, they have, and I was having this discussion with someone else, is that, you know, what your stipulations are from the judge, right? The judge writes your stipulations, that's basically a written court order from the judge, right? So if the judge says you can do this, and you come into my treatment provider, some treatment providers will be like, I don't care what that says, you can't do it. That's a written court order from the judge, that trumps me. So again, everyone does business how they do business. I do business how I do business. I try my best to be an ethical provider.
I just find it counterintuitive to have a correction officer there with a gun, you know?
Yeah, no, he doesn't have the gun.
Yeah,
Are you
but-
gonna talk?
Yeah, like, you know, it's just, I don't find it helpful.
And again, these are all privately owned places. Not all, I mean, some places are just care, but privately owned places, they can make their policies. And so again, we get into, can you move, right? And so you have the right to ask for a change of treatment provider. That's between you and the treatment provider and probation, right? You can ask, they can say no, but you can ask to change treatment provider.
You are trying to change treatment providers because you are trying to hide something.
That's right. I know. The wheel,
Yeah.
the circle, struggle, and again, that's why I've been doing this for about 13 or 14 years. I just became a SOAB approved treatment provider. I am not because I did it. Because I wanted to make sure I could get that approval and still keep my practice how I want my practice. If I couldn't, I would go another 14 years about it. But everybody's different. So I'm a control freak. You doesn't want to do it this way, and if you don't like it, then. Sorry. There's other questions.
Hey, Doctor, first of all, you're a breath of fresh air. Because I've been working with folks convicted of sexual offenses for about 20 years. Get out of prison, helping them through the next nightmare, which is now that I'm out of prison. And stories I hear about treatment that is mandated, which, and I take full responsibility for calling it therapy, because that's what it looks like in so many places.
It's all over the country.
Well, I can't speak
Yeah.
for the rest of the United States, but in Pennsylvania. So to hear you speak, I just wish all the guys would tell me how tough it was last week when they failed a polygraph and spent 6 months in prison. When they don't know how they're gonna pay the bills, they just lost their job because they're on the registry. And they've lost their 4th job in, 18 months because their boss found them. And all these other things. And to hear you speak, I mean, you hear.
I'm not
Some of these
alone,
men
right?
would be weeping
There's a
right
number of us.
Yeah, well, and I'm glad,
Yeah.
glad, and I hope
But we've
you
also
all
become
replace.
kind of like known in our area as the treatment provider of last resort, right? Everybody who, like, we go see them in jail and we're the last shot because they've been kicked out everywhere else for this, that, and the other thing, and they come in and they're with us, they pass the polygraphs, they're great.
Hey, look, congratulations for working with the sweat house. How's that for dating on myself? That really is, that's what you're doing, but now, in looking at your good life model, so much of what you put up there is wonderful. Except that supervision is gonna say, oh, you're not on social media, you're not gonna have it,
It's hard.
you can't have a relationship.
It's
you
very
can't do it. So, again, I guess I'm saying my hat's off for you if you can find a way to tap dance around all of the roadblocks that are thrown up in this one population. We don't do this to anybody else. We don't do this to the
And that's
men
the
convicted of
quote,
arson.
the quote that I stole for that webinar from Mary, again, from the SOAB meeting. She was like, think about this was all to treatment providers. She's like, think about if this was a group of people who are here for eating disorders. Would you yell at them? Would you shame them? Would you call them names? But what, like, but that's the equivalent, like, why would you do that? She's like, that's not what we're supposed to do. That's the head of SOAB saying you're not supposed to do that.
And I believe policy is there, but we all know the difference between policy and practice is big enough to get tractor
There's
trailers.
just more people with treatment providers, parents of the wood stuff.
I mean, I have many, my treatment provider at least was vaguely similar to the way that you were saying. And I sort of interviewed, like my probation officer gave me like 10, and then he says, I'm not telling you who to pick, but I'm just strongly
Go over here.
encouraging, suggesting, anyway. And so I interviewed them and I made sure that they were not going to like really pressure polygraphs because they drive me absolutely insane. The other one was some kind of statement of faith, not on my list. But I noticed that I would be interested to have your contemporary that approaches things from the shaming model, having them speak in this conference and justifying their existence.
They wouldn't get out of line.
We're not saying anything reportable about violence.
So, thank you.
You're preaching to the
Confidentiality.
choir, you're preaching to the choir, and we're appreciative of the
Right.
approach, but that's not what people are. A friend of mine got out of prison not too long ago, and he's saying, is it appropriate for he told me this like an hour ago, is it appropriate for my treatment provider to shame me and cuss at me?
No,
And I'm like, not
No.
ever,
no.
but you might not be in a position where you can change either, so you're gonna have to figure out how to navigate that.
And so again, and speaking of Pennsylvania, so sometimes there's nobody else to go to.
He's in Florida.
Okay. Ooh.
Right, I know.
If you're in more remote places in Pennsylvania, there's nobody, like, maybe there's one treatment provider in the whole county.
Right.
So you don't have another option. Maybe, they're gonna have their favorites and so, but you can always advocate, right? And that's what I would say. The worst they say is no, but you can always ask. And yeah, they maybe, well, you wanna do that. Well, I still gotta talk to probation. They're still doing monthly reports. We can still staff them, but we get that too. That, oh, you're just trying to get out of that. Well, give me all the information, tell me what's going on, and we'll just figure it out.
Do you feel like there's more of an appetite for good lives model around the state? Like, is that growing?
It's growing.
Okay.
So the,
How fast?
Not quite wildfire speed.
so ATSA, the organization, they changed it. The Organization for the Prevention and Treatment of Sexual Abusers is an international organization, and they hold conferences and they do a lot of research-based wonderful stuff, including, right, guidelines for treatment that are Risk-Needs-Responsivity based, that are definitely more kind of good lives model. Like, these are the guys who are writing these books. So I think it depends on where you are in the country. And I would say internationally, we are way behind. Canada, Scandinavian countries, fantastic.
But that's with all of corrections, not just. with-
Oh, yeah.
That's
So
with
it's,
everything they do.
it's out there, and we'll also off the record, right? So if somebody works at one of these agencies and doesn't want to be that way, like whatever the culture is of the agency, it's hard for them to, right? To try to be that dissenting voice or to try to do something a little differently. It's hard.
We have time for one more question.
Okay, sorry. We've gone on bunny trails, and really, I hope this doesn't go anywhere that's gonna get me in trouble. This recording. Okay, good.
Randall, smash that camera, that's Andy's
Now it's Watergate.
What tapes?
Well,
I just had a question. You said that, you had a right to pick your treatment provider, but does it have to be specific to the county where you're going to be released to? Like, can you do treatment virtually?
So it doesn't necessarily have to be in the county. So we have one virtual group. You and I talked, we have one virtual group. We've got folks from some of the more remote places. We do a lot of Lackawanna, and so as long as their probation is okay with it, they do our virtual group, because again, there's not a whole lot of treatment providers, and there's not a whole lot of options.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, and again, even in the SOAB regulations, right, they say, your probation is the one who's gonna give you the list. You have a right to ask. They do have the final say if you're gonna move, but you have a right to ask.
So that I'm in Delaware County, and the fellows that are in Delaware County struggle to go to the provider in Philadelphia, the J.J. Peters Institute,
Mhm.
because they are renowned for their good work.
Yeah.
Because they work with victims and.
And yeah, no, they're
They
fantastic.
are, they've written
Yeah.
a book on so much of this. And the Delaware County official answer is no. Because as Jordan said, it is seen as you're running to somebody who's going to help you or enable you rather than hold you accountable.
We only get from Delco their severe mental health cases, otherwise they keep everything in. So like folks with, some pretty heavy mental health stuff, they'll send them to us. And my relationship with Delco changed immensely. One of my staff, I don't know how he does it. He's like friends with everybody. Like he and Frank Shannon are like this. And I'm like, I can never, like, you must stay with me forever. Because no one's like this with him. He does his job, but yeah. No, it's a hard thing. All right, I'll be quiet.
That was my final question, is if somebody wants to go to someone from your office and they're not in your area, because Jordan and I have had a conversation about like setting up a computer room at their facility, that they could come in person for their intake and then do telehealth in the house, because obviously they're living there, so transportation is an issue.
Right. So like I said, and again, that's in the SOAB regs, right? And I know we did that webinar that you have the right to ask, right? And so it's all gonna depend on probation. If it's a probation culture where they're like, well, you just wanna do that to get away with something, it's gonna be a harder thing to move. But yeah, I mean, I'm old. I love in person. I get telehealth. I'd rather be in person, but our telehealth is for folks in more remote spots, right?
Like
'Cause
me,
they
it's
can't
2.5
get.
hours from the office.
I mean,
But I only
I
ever
used to
come
have,
to the office.
I used to have
because I
a
like
federal
to-
guy who would come, he would drive 3 hours from Cape May, right? Like, but yeah, so you can ask, like, I think that would be great. But it is also about building relationships with probation. And there are some really good progressive probation officers out there. There are.
Not the supervisor.
Okay. I got some I love, and we can really sit down and work things out, and like, there's some great progressive folks out there, but again.
Yeah, I'll say when I had my issue with my first provider, I literally called my PO and said, send me back to jail. I'm not going back to this person who literally said, you can't get a job because you're a piece of shit. And then I called Jen's office and
Go see Tony.
and I said, can I go back to seeing Tony? And they're like,
Go see Tony.
yeah.
No, but and again, I think it's relationship building, right? And it's so, I also spend a lot of time presenting at conferences. I spend a lot of time teaching. I try to change minds one parole or probation officer at a time. But you have to be willing to do that. And some are very open and some aren't, and you can't change every human's mind. But I think people like me have to be out there and saying, there is a way that we can competently do treatment that addresses the community's concern about safety, but also treats the people that are in our programs with dignity that they deserve as human beings. We fight. Lay on the floor, fall into a position of cry sometimes, but we always get back up. Sorry, that was TMI. Thank you, guys. I appreciate your time.
So if